Hello, welcome to this Bizargy virtual event. I'm Steve Tassell, and I will be your host on this webinar discussing the topic of robotic process automation or business process management, or both. It's a question we often hear, and it's not surprising, as with any new technology there is often some confusion. So today's session will explore the market and use cases for both. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce you to Craig LeClair from Forrester, who is their lead analyst in this space. Craig is an internationally recognized expert in helping companies transform from manual and analog-based processes to the mobile, digital, and the cognitive world. His process domains include customer onboarding, financial services, and insurance system modernization. Craig developed Forrester's research series on business agility, outlining market, organizational, and process agility dimensions. So let's have a quick look at the agenda for today's session. In a second, I'll cover off a few words on who Bizargy are for those not familiar with our company and credentials. However, the meat of today's webinar will be delivered by Craig, who will give us Forrester's take on the converging worlds of BPM and RPA. We'll leave time at the end to answer any burning questions you might have, so please post your questions in the Q&A section that you'll see on the console, and we'll endeavor to answer as many questions as we can at the end. Please also take a look at the attachments tab where you'll find downloadable content and links related to this session. Okay, so who are Bizargy? Well, Bizargy is a digital process automation company. We enable customers through our platform to realize their digital transformation goals by focusing on their operation and how this can be digitized to reduce costs, grow revenue streams, and help mitigate against risk. We've been in existence for over 15 years, and over that time we've built up some strong and long-established relationships across the globe and across an array of industries that you can see on the screen. We've helped establish brands reimagine their operations so that they can compete in the digital era. Our approach is underpinned by partnerships that help manage change programs and technology implementations around the world. Okay, so that was just a brief bit on Bizargy. I'm now going to hand over to Craig, who's going to talk about RPM and BPA. Craig, over to you.
Well, thank you. That was a nice introduction, and I'm going to present on robotic process automation and BPM and try to make sense of them both. They're both very interesting markets and technologies that sort of do different things but are very complementary. Let's start with a very confusing chart here, and on the left it really talks about why we are on this call. It's really about the movement to digital disruption. So you see the little people on the left with small dollar signs, and basically the old disruption required really a lot of money and really was driven by a small number of really brilliant people. So think Tom Watson and the IBM mainframe, think the engineers that designed the first Boeing commercial jet. But today we have on the right, we graduate from our great colleges and universities around the world, thousands and thousands of innovators that really have great digital skills and want to tear down our business. They don't need a lot of money. So this is where you get new business models, new approaches to traditional processes and so forth that are very disruptive. But I have to say that while RPA is part of the digital transition story, it's really not as much about disruption as it is about profit, corporate profit and earnings. Most of robotic process automation, which really builds software that mimics the human activity in front of a computer, whether that be a internal desktop in the call center or in the back office, and it really replicates the human activity and thereby really replaces that human work. And it's really been driven, the investment has been driven by this tremendous pressure that companies feel to generate more profits. If you look at this chart, which is a little hard to read, but just shows the growth in corporate profits over the past n number of years and related to the the rise in the stock market. So RPA, while I'm going to talk about there is an opportunity for customer experience, there's an opportunity for disruption, it's really been driven by FTE takeout to this point. Now, moving to the next slide, I wanted to put RPA in perspective in terms of BPM and case management and the other transformational technologies that are really used to move companies from the old way of doing things to the new way. This is a confusing chart, so I apologize for that, but it's what we call a Forrester, a tech radar. And it kind of shows where a particular technology is in terms of its investment profile. Are companies investing in it? So if you're at the end of this chart in the decline equilibrium, there's a bit of a, you're not investing in it in decline. It's being moderately invested in equilibrium. The really growth and investment is in the front phases, creation and survival. So you see RPA at the bottom there as a very hot and surging market. You also see areas like electronic signature and case management. The sort of point that I want to draw on this is that these top line here and the middle line and the lower line, the red line, really indicate the transformative value to the business. And you see that RPA is actually on the lower line because it's largely patching holes, inefficiencies in legacy systems, and doing that in a very fast way. You can download a bot macro and start designing a bot and do it in several days. You can base it on the recording of the clicks and the mouse streams and the human activity, so you can actually jumpstart the development of the bot from a recording. So you don't need any requirements document. You don't need any transformational programs as generally associated with business process management. So one of its appeals is this immediacy that you get, but it is more tactical. In many cases, as we'll see, the best approach is to modernize the process, come up with a new customer self-service approach, build a more disaggregated microservices-based architecture to allow much better interaction across your enterprise, and oftentimes institutionalizing a process by creating bots that are doing patching inefficiencies is not the best way to go. So I just wanted to put it into perspective. It's one of the operational technologies that we track, certainly not the only one. As I said, its value is really, it's an alternative to the bigger programs that are associated with BPM, the discipline, and of course the underlying software capability as well. So you don't need to enlist business analysts and the Business Process Management Center of Excellence. A business can see some inefficiency. It can be profiled in terms of the number of apps accessed, the number of clicks, and you can start robotizing, and that's what's happening, and that's what companies are doing. So it's considered a non-invasive form of integration. There's no data integration. All the integration with RPA is through the desktop, the existing desktop applications. So there's no IT project to do data integration. There are no web services APIs to worry about. And the reality is, and this number is somewhat controversial, but only a small percentage of applications actually have APIs at all. Most of them, 50, 60%, the only way to access them is through the desktop, through existing direct interaction with the application. So in a sense, RPA is saying, forget APIs, let's just go in the way the human's going in today. And that's proving to be very, very effective for a lot of use cases. So let's talk about those use cases. You have in the world of emerging semantics for RPA, you have the attended area and the unattended area. So these are fancy words that really mean attended is where the bot is interacting with a human. The human has some interaction with the bot, and that's generally associated with the front office or agent-led activities. Now, in the transition to more AI-based RPA, it means interaction with chatbots, with natural language processing, with IVR solutions, and so forth. But basically, it's where a human can start and stop a robot. A human might be in an application trying to deal with a customer on the phone and see a link, and that link might be a bot that is scheduled to go off and do a set of activities on behalf of that customer. So you get more immediacy there. So that's the attended world. The unattended world use cases are really the back office. So in shared services, in financial and accounting, I might be doing reconciliations, I might be doing closing, posting to the general ledger, these types of activities. They can be, you can create a batch bot that will do everything that that human was doing. So in a sense, you're taking out the complete human in unattended. Now it's interesting the different ROI characteristics of these two. The contact centers have been beat up for years to get more efficient because it's been a very big number of cost center for a lot of companies. So you think of average hold time, average call time. These metrics have been monitored forever. So there's more rigor in terms of the operations for the contact center. So the ROIs for attended for RPA are not as rich as in the unattended world. So the attended world really is driving more towards customer experience. The unattended world, you can get very, very significant, less than 6-month kind of paybacks by putting it in finance and accounting and procurement and supply chain and all these different areas that are shared business services. So that's kind of the sense. Now, when you look at use cases, I've tried to map them in a classic 2x2. And of course the upper right's always in a 2x2 where you want to be. And you do see different characteristics for use cases within the ROI, within the RPA landscape. There are some that are just pure FTE takeout. I call them the ROI land grab. And there you might find some that don't have any compliance issues. They're low risk, and you can just robotize that group that was doing something related to reinstating credit cards or something like that. The tread carefully is where you have moderate risk, no cognitive potential. So the bonus territory is where I want to focus your attention on. This is an area where you have RPA, you have basically a bot that can do better with the inefficiencies you have, but there's a path to make that bot that digital worker. So think of the bot as a digital worker, right? Some companies are calling them, they're giving them names like Yoda and Apollo and so forth to make them sort of fit in better with the human culture there. I'm not sure that works, but that's sort of what's going on. So think of the digital worker as getting smarter over time, and that's where you can link RPA, which is very executional. The rules or decisions are programmed into the macro, but think of having a knowledge base as part of that can learn to handle increasingly harder exceptions that can actually do real decision making. And that's where you're bringing in AI components. So that to me is the bonus territory. If you can look at RPA processes to robotize that have a potential link to cognitive, that's probably the best way to go. So I want to call out the finance and accounting area, but really all business shared services. It's really the whole operations area of companies, which extend to customer service, which extend to procurement, supply chain. Finance and accounting is a big one. And I've highlighted the areas where we're seeing the most FTE takeout there. And again, I mentioned monthly, quarterly close, reconciliation. One global bank I've been working with, they have 1,800 people that do monthly and quarterly close activities. They think they can robotize 60% of them in 5 years. And the most decisions made by the most complex issue is 50, but the average is about 2.5. So you don't need a very extensive knowledge base to be able to start doing more and more effective digital worker contribution in the finance and accounting area. So that's a big area. A point I'll make, I made earlier, I'll just reinforce, is that for RPA really to grow and not be a flash in the pan set of investments, it really has to start linking more closely with the key orchestration capabilities like business process management, case management, because it's essentially bots that are working off of queues or steps or state transitions that are under the management of those higher level process orchestrations that are really trying to reform the process, that have components to do continual improvement, to have the analytics to understand what's wrong with the process and to fix it. That's a level of agility that you get with those process layers that you don't get in RPA. The only design capability to RPA is to really build one of these very simple macros that can be designed by the business, but still require some programming background. and have the advantage of the recording I talked about, but essentially you don't get any of that design capability. So if RPA doesn't incorporate real intelligence via AI components that I'll talk about in a minute, it really becomes a very flat, uninteresting market that really will die with the death of the legacy systems, which of course have shown great sustainability, but at some point you're going to have to replace those systems. You're going to be doing more self-service. There'll be less data entry in the back office. There'll be much more on-demand communications, less human-driven fulfillment activities. All of that's going to diminish the value of building bots to do that kind of stuff. So really the only direction is to get more intelligent. Now, I'll just build this out because this is just a very simple animation. But in terms of stages and climbing the cognitive path, most of 98% of RPA today is in this stage 1. So think of populating tables, think of doing data entry, think of quality and testing, things that really were very, very low level in intellect required. Now, phase 2 is really where the current focus is. All the conversations about for phase 3, but the immediate focus for customers dragging RPA into new areas is this area of unstructured content. So going into a set of loan documents, doing some entity extraction, doing some correlation of data that was entered, basically giving the bots more intelligent things to do by understanding the unstructured, the document set, the unstructured content, looking at XML files, that kind of thing. So stage 2 is very real. The technology is here today. It's really a combination of content analytics and RPA and things like OCR and so forth. Very much here today, and that's where the current energy is, at least what I see from customers that are driving RPA to the next level. A lot of the conversation is in phase 3, which is what I've just been talking about in terms of building a knowledge base, building AI components into RPA. And there are 2 fundamental directions there, and I'll talk about those in a second. But let me first talk about an issue that I've been really focusing on in my research in the last year and a half. And that is, what is the future of work story here? On the left, you see our current jobs. So you see the in-person service jobs. These are the people taking care of your mom, right? That's one of the biggest growth areas. Humans that have to deal with other humans in a very direct and personal way. Funeral directors is really a growth area for any of those thinking of a backup career. But it's really these cubicle categories up here. So these are the working class categories. These are basically people with high school education. That's one of the definitions for working class. But you have blue-collar workers at 11 million. You have food and related, the biggest category at 17 million. You have cubicles, people toiling in cubicles, which is my area of focus and concern. That breaks into the attended area, sales and related and unattended. And it's this cubicle, these 9.2 million, that are the target of RPA. So the issue is, and companies are already starting to talk about their digital workforce. They're talking about having bots that are taking the place of people that are in cubicles. And how do they manage the digital workforce? Well, the managers that manage the humans want the same kind of performance information about how that employee is doing. So they're providing a performance information around the digital worker. That's very interesting because it mirrors the human in such a strong way. So the societal question is whether, as you throw people out of these cubicles, they end up in the what I call the obsolescence queue, or they end up in the gig economy doing other things that are more on a part-time basis, that are the contingent workforce. And the reality is that only a small percentage of the working class can get to the digital age jobs on the right, and that's automation jobs, cloud engineers, data scientists, and all of that. So you've got a big issue. There's a tension underlying this whole area of robotic process automation that we need to understand the change management anecdote for, and we don't yet. It's a new area. Even if you apply traditional change management, which you got the 7-step Prosky model, it assumes that you understand what the change is going to be. as a fundamental starting point for building your change management strategy. In this area, we don't know how smart these bots are going to get and at what rate. So we don't even know what the future roles and the future tasks and the number of humans that will be doing that. We can't forecast that accurately enough to even really build a change management strategy for it. So there are a lot of issues there. I could wax on that topic for quite a while, but I will spare you. Let's get to the the model and forecast here. So as I mentioned, in the cubicle area, these are the number of humans that are going to be replaced over the next 5 years. It's about 4 million. The more knowledge worker guys on the right here, they're okay. At least they're not going to be affected by RPA as much. So when you take those numbers, you can project to a market that's probably $2 to $3 billion for RPA over 5 years. It's going to be a lot of growth. Now, where does RPA sit in terms of all of the AI building blocks? And as we know, AI is not just one thing. It's, in our view, 13 things, and that includes things like natural language processing and speech recognition and machine learning and deep learning, which is really a subset of machine learning. And these all have different phases, like our previous chart like this, in terms of their maturity, in terms of the investment going on, and so forth. But the two directions for RPA, which you see here, so RPA made it into the AI building blocks, even though there's no AI component to RPA today. But what we see is that RPA will link with machine learning in the short term. In the even shorter term, it's going to link with text analytics you see here in the middle of the chart. As I talked about, that's the phase 2, and that's going to be more and more energy in that in the next year or so. And ultimately, it's going to link with chatbots and natural language processing and speech recognition to have much more sophisticated tasks that can be directed by the customer. So RPA is very much part of where we're going in this whole AI landscape. Yeah, and so I just have a couple more slides here. This is the use case I talked about. I won't go through this because of the timing here, but basically you might want to look through this. This is the customer coming in through a chatbot, and getting to a human because the chatbot's ineffective. The human handles the problem, and then the text of the voice conversation with the customer is converted into machine language that then is used to help the machine learn and to deal with that exception next time. This is the learning model that leverages RPA and natural language processing that all the majors are working on. This is the customer service environment for the future, and RPA has a role in that. This is what the whole market looks like. Basically, as I said, 2.9 million for RPA. That's the dark green. The green, the lighter green, is really the whole expenditure on AI, which is all those 13 building blocks that are related, again, to the cubicle and knowledge worker category. So it's not AI in factories and in other more physical environments. Now, we looked at the provider platforms for this, and we have a very detailed analysis called the Forrester Wave on the RPA landscape. But basically, these are the things that you look for in these portfolios. You have a development environment, you have a control room capability, you have analytics, you have architectural issues that all deal with going through that UI. There's a lot of special stuff that you need to deal with in interacting through the user interface of an existing desktop. VDI integration, Citrix and global services integration, and so forth. These are platforms that result in a whole set of providers coming onto the market. This is just a scatter chart of the logos of the RPA providers. I sort of split them in terms of attended on the upper part and unattended in the lower part, and I've also done a split versus service and product. So the product portfolio companies are on the left. And the more service, there are probably 100 different service companies that are coming into this market as we speak. Those are ones that they're probably partnered with somebody on the left but they can provide the set up the operating model for you. They can actually give you design jumpstart for building bots initially and so forth. So it's a very, very active market. And this is what a lot of companies are trying to build. It's an operating model. And this applies really to BPM as well as it really applies to automation. I think what I advise companies is to think don't build an RPA operating model around a specific RPA product, certainly. Build an automation operating model so that you can provide some design capability on the left here to the business, because the business understands the process. They hired the humans. They understand the subtleties of the process, so let them do the design. But let's have the advice being provided by the technology management on how to do that. Let's have all the infrastructure managed, the catalog of reusable robots, everything you see on the right here. Basically, companies are trying to work this out, but it seems to be a very federated environment, where you have a lot of activity going on in the business. And again, business in this context are the operations areas, right? It's not sales, it's not marketing, it's the core operations of the business. It's interesting to see the development. There are linkages to the Business Process Manager Center of Excellence. There are linkages to these external community service providers that I talked about. A lot of the BPO provider contracts that are with companies, the companies are trying to look at them and say, why don't I robotize certain capabilities? That's low value, fingers on keys type work I'm doing with the BPO. Why don't I do that onshore with RPA and have that contract do something else or be closed down or diminished? So there's a real change in the whole BPO segment of the tech economy, as they first had to deal with the cloud disruption because a lot of data centers were closing down, moving to the cloud, and now they have to deal with this rampant robotization of the low-value tasks that they built their businesses on. So very interesting kind of convergence of technology and services and what companies are doing. So I think that's my last slide, and I am going to turn it over. Just beware, there's going to be a lot more change, but change is generally a good thing in the end. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Greg. Thank you so much for that. Very insightful. I particularly thought your description of the attended and unattended tasks, I think that was a very good way to think about the different use cases for RPA, so that's brilliant. Interesting to hear your insights in terms of finance and accounting function and how that's a particularly ripe area right now. And actually, that leads me into the first question. So you talked about the function, but we're interested, or the audience are interested to hear more from you in terms of, are there particular geographies or industries where you're seeing a particular uptake in RPA right now?
Well, financial services is the immediate uptake, things like customer onboarding, but it's the shared services, the shared business services that is the biggest area, and that is across all companies. So every company has finance and accounting. Every company has a procurement. Most companies have a supply chain. Most companies have some kind of customer service environment. So those are shared across all industries. I've certainly seen specific industry things in oil and gas, as well as logistics related to manufacturing. So it's not just the core financial services. I'm seeing a furniture store, have robots schedule the delivery of furniture for them. So it's kind of everywhere, and anywhere you have people that are doing a lot of data entry and fingers on keys and sitting in cubicles doing a lot of work, that's where RPA can be helpful.
Okay, fantastic. And I think we've got time for one more question that's come in. So the question is, do you need a BPM platform or system to get full use of RPA?
Do you need a BPM platform to get full use of RPA?
Yeah.
So I would say no, but if you have both, you have a number of advantages. One is, if the bots fail, you've replaced a human queue with robots. The BPM solution in many cases is used to route around failed bots, to route to the remaining human queue, because you usually don't eliminate all the humans, you eliminate a high percentage of them. So there is a availability and resilience aspect of BPM. The second aspect is you have a real advantage from understanding the overall end-to-end process. RPA, it doesn't have a design surface the way BPM does to really map out the entire process. So you can benefit from having RPAs as pure as sub-icons on your process maps. And also you'll have instances where you actually need data integration. So you may be able to design a much easier robot if you get data directly from a database or another system, where you can enlist the APIs of a BPM solution to do that. So you can simplify the bot development by leveraging the broader integration capabilities of BPM. So they're highly complementary. I'd say that you can't say that you need BPM to get the most out of RPA, but you can say that to get the most out of your automation journey, having both is the right thing to do.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. And that's a good place to conclude the webinar. So thank you for your time today, Craig, and for answering those questions. And to those of you that posted your questions online, and apologies we didn't get a chance to get to all questions today, but we will endeavour to follow up afterwards. Today's session is recorded, so for those that missed any part of the session, you'll be able to get it online later on. As soon as this session has finished, you'll be sent an email with a link to view the session. For more information, please visit bizaji.com, where you'll find further content, case studies and white papers. And of course, this session is part of the Bizaji virtual event, which is happening over the next 3 days. So please feel free to log on to Bright Talk and view the other sessions and content that will be available. There's a number of sessions covering customer speaker presentations, demonstrations, and further practical advice. Thanks for listening today, and have a great day.